Good evening, everyone. This is Angela from Women's Personal Finance, and tonight I am joined by Jessica from The Fioneers, here to talk to us about SlowFI and how to design a life that you do not want to retire from. So she comes to us from a background in HR and some pretty severe burnout that has been pivoted into entrepreneurship and a life that she absolutely adores. And the last live video chat we did together was actually when she was parked in front of my house in her camper van. So I'm sorry, this is not as fun to be on opposite coasts again and only seeing you on video. But yeah, today we wanted to do a video for the whole women's personal finance community. And Jessica's here to just kind of talk, how life can be better now before you reach financial independence. The Fioneers tagline is about how the journey should be as remarkable as the destination. And I feel like she is living that right now, and she does a wonderful job helping encourage others to do the same.
Thanks so much, Angela, for having me. And really excited to see all the folks here. So yeah, if you haven't yet, Angela mentioned as you were joining to let us know if there's anything in particular that you're intrigued by in terms of SlowFI, or if there's some sort of lifestyle design that you're interested in. I see Katie talking about just how would love to get off the hamster wheel and do something more creative and nourishing. And that's exactly what SlowFI is about. So I can talk a little bit about what SlowFI is generally. So I would say SlowFI is connected in with the slow movement. So if you think about slow food, slow travel, slow living, all of those things are actually not necessarily about the speed in which you go, but the level of intentionality that you have along the path. And I see SlowFI in much of a same way, where the focus is on how can I intentionally use the financial freedom that I'm building to design a life that I love today without jeopardizing a comfortable traditional retirement. But I'm not waiting and I'm not pushing to try to achieve FIRE as fast as possible. It's not a race, right? I can live a life that I love while I still need to generate income. Yeah. So Angela, so I know you've been, I featured you a few times on SlowFI interviews. And so for Angela, I know part of her SlowFI path has been to work part-time. So when Hunter was really young, you started doing that. He's a big kid now.
Yeah, he's going into third grade this fall. I had always originally thought when I went part-time or 32 hours a week, so whether you count that part-time or not, significantly less than full-time, because before that I usually averaged the typical 45 plus hours a week. So going to 32 was a significant drop in hours and a significant drop in income. And I always thought once he started elementary school that I would go back to full-time. And at this point, I've been doing it for so long that I cannot imagine spending 40, 45 plus hours a week at my day job. I have too many other things. That? I don't know. I mean, my husband's godfather has been retired over 10 years. He retired in his 50s, and he is so busy all the time. And I seem to find that with a lot of people who, cut back hours or when they retire, that their life grows to get so full that they can't imagine how they possibly gave so many hours a week to their job.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for sure. And so I can jump in and share my SlowFI story in a minute, but I also feel like one thing that I want to call out is the fact that, like, I think was it last year or a couple of years ago that you were like, I would love, my next thing is I would love to take like a month off every year. So
Yes.
actually, I would love for you to talk a little bit about how you're like, starting to experiment with that.
Yeah. So when you and I had talked a couple of years ago, I said, I'd love to do 3-4+ weeks at a time, but there's just no way I could do that. And last year we went for a full 2 weeks to visit our close friends who live in Italy now. And when we were closing out that trip, we realized that it really just wasn't long enough. And we've also talked about wanting to go to, New Zealand and Australia at some point. And my husband has said, there is no way I'm doing that for less than 3 weeks because it is too far. That is too far of a plane flight. And I was like, oh, okay, well, I guess we should probably figure out how to be able to go for 3 weeks then to be able to do a long trip like that. And so later this year, we are going to be taking a full 3 weeks again back to Europe to visit our friends. But, even 2 or 3 years ago, that felt wildly out of reach, that we had never taken more than 10 days for a trip. And so Jessica really encouraged me to experiment with that, and that you don't have to go from a 10-day vacation to, a 3 or 4 week vacation, and making incremental changes to figure out what really works. And, at some point, we're probably going to figure out that that's long enough, that we don't want to take a longer time away in one go, but I'm excited to experiment and figure out where that upper bound is.
Awesome. Yeah. And who knows what that upper bound will be. I'm still looking for my upper bound after just getting back from a 3.5-month camper van trip. Still waiting to find that. So I can talk a little bit too about my SlowFI story. So I actually heard about financial independence in 2018. And I think, Angela, that was right around the time that you were blogging and like starting to blog. And we met at that point in time. And, I was intrigued by it. I thought it was interesting. I was reading all of this content from people who were like trying to retire as quickly as possible and depriving themselves and riding their bikes everywhere, which, like, riding your bike everywhere is great. If you
I
want
rode
to,
my bike to work today.
yeah,
It was fabulous.
if you want to, but it was like eating beans and rice and living, in a house with like 5 million roommates. And, it seemed like there was this real tone of like struggle to it, that like you need to struggle to sort of get there. And that was not interesting to me. The thing that I was intrigued about was like, wow, there's this whole world of people who are figuring out like, what do I love to do? And what's the like work that I want to do in the world? And how can and figuring out how to make that happen for themselves. And so that was really intriguing to me. And then I actually started reading some like more lifestyle design related content of like people who are designing awesome lives and had like no thought about finances at all. And I was like, okay, that might be a bit much too. And so I wanted to sort of bring it together, and to say like, okay, where's the like appropriate level of focus on financial freedom and the appropriate level of focus on lifestyle design for me, right? Personally. And so, so pretty soon after I learned about financial independence, it was like, oh, this is so cool in terms of like people are doing cool stuff. I want to do cool stuff, but I don't want to wait 10 years to do that.
Or 15 or 20.
Yeah, right, exactly.
No matter like my best like savings rate, there was no 10-year track for me.
Yeah.
My husband and I don't make enough money, generally the 10-year track is either you are like rice and beansing it for your whole life, or you do make 6-figure salaries. So that for me was a big part of it, is the realization that unless I many times my income, there was not going to be a like retire before 40.
Yeah. Well, and I think that that's like, and that, I mean, for fire, like if you can retire by the age of like 30 or 35, by all means, push for it, do it, grind it out in your 20s. But like, that's not realistic for most people. Right. Like that wasn't realistic for me. And I wasn't willing to keep pushing, especially because in the middle of 2018, I was already experiencing some depression, anxiety, I was in a really toxic work environment, and really struggling. And it sort of got to the point where, and I honestly think that part of learning about financial independence kind of like pushed me over the edge, because I started to see like, I don't have to be here, like something else is possible. And then at that point, it was like my brain and my body just decided to say, like, you're not going to get yourself out of this situation. Like, we're going to make you get out of the situation. And so I started experiencing really severe anxiety and panic attacks. And at that point, I was unable to work. I was unable to even like look at my work computer without having a panic attack. And really, I at first I thought like this is going to be a couple days, and then I thought it was going to be a couple weeks, and then it ended up being that I took about 6 months off of work completely, and really needed to sort of reorient my entire life around getting healthy, right? And improving my mental health. And so I, had a lot of realizations during that time about like, what do I really want? And what do I think that success really looks like? And I had previously thought success was climbing the corporate ladder and getting that 6-figure salary and, all of that. And to be honest, I got that 6-figure salary 2 weeks before I had my mental health crisis.
So you can
And
always say that you made a 6-figure salary at
I
your day
can't,
job.
I mean, I guess. But like I look back on that and I think like I worked so hard for that. And like for what? To just have like really terrible mental health. And obviously I know that many people can make 6-figure salaries and not have really terrible mental health. There's ways certainly to do that. But so for me though, that my whole perspective needed to shift. And so after I took about 6 months off. I was actually on a medical leave for most of that time, and then decided to quit the toxic job. And then when I went back to work, part-time. So I went back to work 3 days a week. And at first it was because that's all I felt like my mental health would be able to handle. And then about 6 months into it, I was, starting to feel like, okay, I have some excess energy, some sort of excess brain space. What do I want to do with it? And then it was around that time that I learned about the idea of SlowFI and semi-retirement. So the idea that you could create an income stream, like doing something that you really truly love to do. And if you get to a point called SlowFI, which I'll explain in a second, that at that point, you only need to cover your actual costs. So there's no need to save 30, 40, or, whatever percent of your income at that point. You can scale back and say, I'm only going to cover my actual costs, right? Because SlowFI is that point where you have already invested enough for your traditional retirement at your current age that as long as you don't touch it, it's going to grow to provide you with what you need at the age of 60 or 65.
You may have also heard of it as barista-fi, which I don't really love that name, but you may have heard of it that way, because being a barista is not easy work, but it kind of is that definition of SlowFi of you can make less money, you can work fewer hours, and just make sure that you're covering your costs without, oh my God, am I shoveling enough for when I want to fully retire?
Yeah. I also sometimes think of barista-fi as like a step beyond SlowFi that's like semi-retirement, where you're maybe to a point where you could withdraw like 1 or 2% of your portfolio and it would still grow to provide you with what you need at 65, but you would still need to cover a portion of your costs with active income. So I think of that. Sometimes I think of like barista fire and semi-retirement as synonymous, but I like semi-retirement as a term better. But because I think barista fire is actually like all about finding work that you would actually enjoy doing. And if that's being a barista, great. Like work that you enjoy doing is not necessarily going to be easy.
Which would be more like park ranger FI for me. Because in my early mid 20s, I was a park ranger for like weekends and some evenings. And maybe, I don't know if I'd want to do it again, but for funsies, maybe, but like an actual, committed schedule, maybe not. But, it did not make a ton of money, but I got to take people on like bird watching tours and that sort of thing. So for me, it wouldn't be barista FI. It would maybe be, park ranger FI.
Yeah. Cool. Yeah. So okay. So I learned about Coast Fire like 6 months after I was working part-time. And when I learned about it, I did the calculations and like we'd been, pursuing. So technically we had been pursuing financial independence for like a couple of years before I actually like knew about it and got on board. My husband was like constantly focused on increasing our savings rate and like doing, the pay yourself first method and all of that. And so, and we were in our 20s when he was doing that. And so we got to a point where I was like, okay, I've learned about Coast-Fi. Let's calculate it, and realized that we were there, which I feel really fortunate and lucky to sort of be in be in a partnership where, I had someone thinking about that when I wasn't able to, or wasn't sort of willing to focus on the finances of it. And now as a feminist, I look back and I think like, oh my gosh, how was I like not involved in the finances for like the first, 8 years that we were married? And now I'm very involved.
Super common. I mean, It's not just that, you didn't think about it, but women are generally raised and taught that, money is not their space and they don't have to worry about the big picture finances. So much of the money content directed toward women is, how to budget, how do you coupon, how do you do the day-to-day, not the, how do you invest for your retirement. So, I think it's really easy to be like, well, I should have done a better job at this. But really it is a big systemic thing. It wasn't just Jessica wasn't paying attention to the high level finances. That is, the way that society as a whole sees money. Women do the little day-to-day budgeting and men do the big picture investing, which is just, one small reason why, especially in our later years, women are much more likely to be below the poverty line than men. You're muted now. Sorry, did I mute you? That might have been me.
I think that you maybe did.
I muted some folks that just joined. So I think some people are starting to figure out where the Zoom link is, which is great.
Yeah. So, okay. So when I learned about Coast-Fi about 6 months into the part-time work, I actually had an opportunity to increase my hours at that point. And I realized like, no, we're Coast-Fi. Life is so much better when I'm working 3 days a week. Like life is better for me. I'm so much happier. I have so much more energy. I'm able to support the household more. And we also realized like there was no reason for me to increase my hours because we actually realized we were spending less too, because we were just less miserable. And so we weren't spending all of the money on like takeout and convenience and, this fancy vacation because we deserved it, like we had time to actually be intentional with our money. And Angela, I know you've had this experience too, that like when you focus on improving your life, that like maybe you make less money, but it's like I was able to be so much more intentional about my finances. And we realized like we were still saving like just as much money. We just spent like $15,000 less that year.
I am finding that has shifted a bit as women's personal finance has become a larger part of my life. When I first went part-time, I was not even blogging. And for the first few years, I cut back my hours in early 2016, and it took a whole nother year until year and a half until life had stabilized enough that then I started blogging at Tread Lightly, Retire Early. And then it wasn't until after that, as my son got older and I continued to protect how many hours I worked at my day job, that women's personal finance was able to take some more of my time. And WPF would absolutely not be a thing if I had worked this full time. Regina, my other half on WPF, also works very, very limited hours. She barely has a day job at this point. And, for both of us, we have one child and not more. And neither of us work a 40-hour-a-week job. And I'd have to say that like WPF would never have become anything beyond a Facebook group, and wouldn't even be the Facebook group it is today if we were both working full-time hours, because it takes so much out of you. And it's not just the 40, 45 hours a week. It's also the commute both ways. If you have to go into the office and thinking about prepping your food and whatnot, and then your weekends become chores, and then you do it all over again on Monday. And I'm assuming that some of the people listening to this are feel that experience deeply. And that's where sometimes it feels like you can't make less money. And that isn't to say that that isn't true for everyone. There is a certain amount of money where you are just doing everything you can to pay your bills and stay afloat. But when you start making a bit more than that, is when I think there is a point where you can find other ways to cut back and other ways to save money just from a new equilibrium that makes it worth finding different ways to live your day to day.
Yeah, for sure. So we definitely experienced that. And so then I decided not to increase my hours. And then I wanted to figure out like, how do I use this mental space that I have? And so one thing that I was sort of toying with at the time was like these questions around financial independence. It's like, what would you do if you didn't need to work for income? And then what if I could like happen to make income doing some of these things I would love to do? And started experimenting with different ideas with the goal of like, okay, if I don't make any money, I can continue working part-time for, sort of as long as I want to, and I could get to this semi-retirement or barista fire if I make like 20K a year or something that could help. And it just so happened that, I had started the blog. I started doing the life design and career discovery coaching. So using my HR background to help people figure out how they wanted work to fit into their life. And that took off. And I was able to actually transition out of my day job about 2 years after starting to work part-time. So in January of 2021, I, had started that business, and I had run, 3 or 4 cohorts of coaching by the time I was ready to actually take the leap. to
I
entrepreneurship.
can't believe it's been that long.
Yeah,
It's kind of
yeah.
wild.
Yeah, it's wild. I think I'm on my like 15th cohort of group coaching at this point. So yeah, it's been it's been a lot of fun. And I think the sort of key takeaway from that for me was like working through the process, like working through a lifestyle design process of figuring out like what are the things that I really love and like what are the core motivations and what are the things that really frustrate me, because I think those can sometimes be indications of like you're passionate about this thing, or like the areas of tension in your life, right? And so for me, I have this sort of vivid moment of being at work in an HR position and being and like talking to one of the people who worked in marketing, who was like, I just want to like quit my job and be a freelancer and like travel around the country in a van. And like she said it as if like that could never happen. And I wanted to be like, oh my gosh, you could absolutely do that. Like marketing could so easily be done freelance. You could like sell your apartment that you have right now. Um, but it was like I wasn't allowed to in my role as like an HR person that like, is supposed to be helping to like retain employees and, all of that. And so for me, that was a real indication of like, no, you want to help people figure out what they truly want to do, not in the context of a corporation or an organization, right? Like people are so much bigger than, just the work that they do. And so, that was a real indication for me that like that was a direction that I wanted to go. And then, yeah, so started experimenting. So first I started experimenting with like, actually hosted a women's personal finance meetup in Boston, like right before the pandemic. I think it was like December of 2019. And that like gave me like that was like one of my little experiments, and that gave me the confidence to be like, okay, now I'm gonna like give a presentation at my local Choose Spy group, and then I'm going to, and then the pandemic hit and I was like, okay, I'm gonna do an online workshop, and so that experimentation process of, taking a small idea and seeing, what piece of it I could test out in like an afternoon or a weekend to see like, do I like this? Is this something that I want to do more of? And then also building skills and confidence. And so, yeah, so that women's personal finance meetup was actually my like first experiment with before I started my business.
And that was like when WTF was like 5,000 people on Facebook or something
Yeah.
like that.
Uh-huh.
So
Yeah. Yeah. So anyway, so sort
I
of back,
do see
yeah.
someone asking, just need to figure out what to do instead of my stressful day job. So you're talking about
Mm,
how you started experimenting, but can you talk a little bit about like, how'd you figure out even where to start experimenting?
yeah, that's a great question. So I worked through with actually a group of people, a lifestyle design process. So I first worked through a book called Designing Your Life, which I now incorporate into my own group coaching program that I run. But in lifestyle design, there's sort of three basic steps. So the first step of that process is sort of identifying the elements of your ideal life. And so involves some introspection and some mindfulness, to understand like what are the things that I truly love to do versus what are the things that I want to love or think I should love to do, right? What do you actually enjoy? What are those core motivations? So those things that like get you really excited or frustrate you, or those tension points, as I was just talking about. And then the third key piece is sort of what are the conditions that you need to thrive? And that could be, and I would say that's almost like living in alignment with like your individual nature, right? And so for me, there's so many pieces of things that I learned that I'm able to incorporate into different areas of my life. So some examples of that are I'm pretty introverted, so I know I need, time to myself. But I do enjoy spending time with small groups of people. I like to go really deep. And so with a smaller number of people, so they know that about myself. I also know that I really like to, or I need plenty of ample downtime to focus on my mental health and to sort of keep myself kind of in an even place, right? And so those are, some of those things of sort of figuring out like what are the conditions that you need to be able to thrive. And then you use all of that knowledge as a launching off point to come up with a bunch of different ideas. And so we actually did a conversation, this was, last year about dreaming big.
Yeah, that was like
and like
spring
5-year planning.
22.
Yeah. Yeah. So doing a
Yeah.
planning process for yourself and dreaming big and brainstorming. I actually encourage you to do this in the context of a group. It was super helpful for me to do this in the context of a group. And it's almost like you're looking at what are these core elements of my ideal life and coming up with like every possible idea that you can think of that could bring those things together.
Yeah, and we did that as a group in WCF Insiders, and it was really great. Jessica came and talked lifestyle design and, dreaming and 5-year plans, and then we came back as a group and, talked out where we were feeling. And, there really is something powerful about having a smaller group to really commit to follow up with this stuff. Like as much as, and a conversation like this one is really great, it takes committing to following up and talking through things and really being accountable to yourself and other people to have it actually change.
Yeah. And another thing too, for me, like having a group of people coming up with ideas, it was like, wow, these people actually think I could do these things. Like I think sometimes other people believe in us so much more than we believe in ourselves. And I experienced that and was like, oh, these other women think that like I could like go run a retreat and I could slow travel the world and figure out my favorite places and like take people to them and do retreats for them in these places, right? Like those were the ideas that were coming up that I was like, that would be awesome. And I would absolutely love to do that. But it felt so big and so far away. And I think if I hadn't been with a group of people, I may have been like, oh, I could never do that. But I was with this group of people and was like, okay. So then, once you come up with that whole list of ideas, then you say, okay, what are the 3 to 4 that I'm like most interested in exploring? Right? You're not saying like, I'm going to jump in and I'm going to like try to plan a retreat tomorrow, right? Like that would have been incredibly scary. And like, I have no idea what I would have even done at that point. But instead I said, okay, how can I start to experiment with this? Right. And I think that's the process, how lifestyle design, that process differs is that you want to experiment and prototype. And so you say, okay, I have this idea. First step, I'm going to write down every single question that I have about that idea. So like, how do you do it? How does someone become this? How do people actually make money doing this? Would I enjoy it? Would this thing give me enough community, enough, XYZ, right? And so you write down every question you can think. Sometimes your inner critic is going to have questions like, you could never make money doing that. And I suggest turning that into a question. How do people make money doing that? And then from there, you can start to brainstorm, right? And brainstorming is just coming up with a list of every single thing you can think of. And you don't need to do them all. You get to come up with all the crazy ideas and then you choose the ones you want to do of how you could answer those questions. And that's what experimentation is, right? And you can answer those questions. And I would say an experiment is not internet research. Right? Internet research can help you figure out your experiments. But an experiment is a conversation with a person going to observe something, right? And so for me, I was like, oh, retreat, like it sounds great to run retreats. I should probably go to some, right? So that was an observation. Was I went to I went to a sense positive retreat. I've been to the women's personal finance retreat, went to a Camp FI, and really got a sense of like, okay, here's the things that I like really liked about these. And then here's the things that I might do a little bit differently in my own sort of unique spin and flair. And so you start to sort of learn through that observation. And then the third type of experiment is like a beta test. And so then that was then, okay, how can I shrink down the experience of possibly running in a retreat in the future to something I can try out in a weekend? And that's when I planned that women's personal finance meetup. And when I spoke at my Choose FI group, right? Those were the specific experiments that helped me to learn, do I actually really like this? Two, what do I need to know? Like, what are the skills that I need to build, and like the resources and the sort of network to be able to do this? And I think one other thing that experimentation helps you do is it helps you, like, as you're taking a small step, all the same limiting beliefs and like the fears are going to come up. And so you're able to work through them when the stakes are low, so that when you get to a point where the stakes are actually higher, you're like, oh, I've sort of built these new neural pathways and I've built the skills to be able to work through these limiting beliefs. Right. So I would say a lifestyle design process is probably your best bet. So figuring out, what do I really want? Right. And what are the conditions I need to thrive? Brainstorming a whole bunch of ideas, preferably with a group of people, and then starting to experiment with those.
And figuring out what you don't want, what you don't like.
Yes, exactly. Experimentation can help you figure out what you like and what you don't like, so you can like rule that out and move on to the next thing. Yeah.
Does anyone have any specific questions about this? Jess, you've been using the example of wanting to host your own retreat. And, when we talked even, a year and a half ago, that was just a someday, I hope I can do it. This is something that sounds really amazing. I want to do it. And you're doing it this fall.
Yeah.
Which I think is just the coolest thing. And I'm really, really sad I can't attend, which is why you're going to have to do future ones so that I can come in a future year. But I just think it's so awesome that, it started in 2019 with a little women's personal finance in-person meetup. And now you're, throwing your whole own retreat, like in person with a whole group of people, which I think is just the coolest thing ever.
Yeah. And well, it's so neat because the vision was like, what if I could slow travel and like travel around the country and around the world and find places that I really love, and then host retreats in those places so I can help people experience these like same things while also diving into, lifestyle design content and such. And so it's fun. So then we traveled this year. We built out a camper van actually in 2022. This, but for those of people who are on the call, so my husband and I built out a camper van, and actually went on a 3.5-month road trip earlier this year. So we got back about a month ago. And one of the places that we went was Colorado, and sort of the Rocky Mountain National Park area of Colorado. And that's where we're hosting the retreat. And we got to like spend time at the retreat site and figure out the cool, the cool stuff to do nearby. And so, yeah, it feels like this is like it's a 4 to 5-year-old dream sort of becoming a reality through taking these like tiny steps over the last 4 years,
which is just like amazing. It's one of those things where it could have easily just been this big dream of something you would love to do and then never do it, and instead you are doing it. So someone asked, do you have a SlowFI group to follow so I can get ideas for planning?
Mhm.
I'm in the process.
Yeah. So I do have there's a SlowFi Facebook group. So it's called SlowFi Enthusiasts.
I'll drop a link in the chat too.
Okay. Yeah. And it's there's a short link to it, which is thefioneers.com/FB for Facebook. So people could find it that way. And then my website is The Fioneers as well. Yeah, so you can definitely find that there. And then in terms of the retreat, I'm happy to talk about that for a second. So I'll say it's a little bit late in the process, but the retreat will be happening in Colorado, in the Winter Park area. So about 2 hours outside of Denver, right outside Rocky Mountain National Park. In September 28th to October 1st. And we're bringing together 40 people to come together to explore different lifestyle designs, to think about and focus on like what's really required financially to make that happen. And so there's actually 2 people who are speakers, that one is a CFP and one's a financial coach, who are going to be there to like help walk people specifically through their numbers and how to like make these plans a reality as well. And then we're going to focus also on how do we work through our mental barriers and creating an experimentation plan. So creating that plan to start moving forward on that dream that could then become a reality in the next 3 to 5 years. And so, yeah, so we're doing that. There is actually 1 ticket left for that retreat. So yeah, most of the spots are full, but if it is something that you'd be interested in, you could grab that last ticket and join us.
And if you're like me, you're going to hope that she does one next year, because I just can't make that weekend work. But I will be experiencing lots of FOMO that weekend because it's going to be awesome. Mm-hmm. So basically, it's just going to be an incredible retreat, and you're going to love it so much that you're going to do one next year that I am going to be able to attend selfishly.
That's my plan. I'm already looking at where I want to do the 2024 retreat.
Oh,
so and trying to figure out like what is my place that I want to help all of the other people who join experience while they dive into the lifestyle design.
That's so fun because you get to pick places you want to go to.
Yeah.
So then it's totally your SlowFi, but more than just traveling.
Right. So, yeah. Well, and like, what are my favorite places and how do I want to help? Like, I'm like in my mind, I'm like Blue Ridge Parkway, like Asheville, North Carolina, or Zion National Park, or Vermont, like some of just my favorite places that I feel like are so conducive to just like being in a really beautiful place and having like all the access to the outdoor stuff and kind of being like a little off grid to be able to, get yourself into a brain space to be able to focus on stuff that we don't always focus on in our daily life.
So we are over time thanks to some of the technical glitches earlier. And I just want to say thank you to everyone who came and joined us tonight. And to make sure that you are number 1 on the Women's Personal Finance email list, because for those of you who joined us from Facebook, you know that the algorithm is really terrible, and as is Facebook Lives at this point. And if you are interested in videos like these, we do host monthly chats through Woven, our off Facebook community platform. And we do also eventually put some of those videos up on our YouTube. But if you want to be able to attend more of these live, Woven is a great place to be. It is just $5 a month, and it's a great place to interact with Women's Personal Finance off of Facebook, which, I think like many of you, I have a very love-hate relationship with Facebook, and it is really nice and peaceful to interact with people elsewhere. And when there is a technical glitch and Facebook is not cooperating, I can drop something on Woven and no people can actually see it. So It is also really nice for that reason. And yeah, shout out to our Woven community members and our insiders who are here in this chat. Like with a lot of things, you get what you put in. And so what we've also found is that the people who are most invested and committed to the WPF community are the ones also that end up showing up to events, who end up connecting and interacting with other community members, you know, over the days and months. And they tend to get a lot more out of WPF. The Facebook page is wonderful. You know, it's probably one of the best groups on Facebook, but it is Facebook. And if you're really looking to dive deeper into the WPF community, off Facebook is really where the magic happens. And shout out to Jessica, who is on Woven as well as one of our OG insiders. She was one of the very first people to support WPF when we launched Insiders in January, February of 2021. So, you know, it's wonderful to have friends that are truly friends, but are also online content creators in this like money space, and really focused a lot also on women and non-binary folks. I think it's really special when we have people that are in our community, and you know, I've never felt like we've been in competition with each other. We've always been in community with each other.
Yeah, rising tide lifts all the boats.
That's absolutely the goal. So again, for anyone looking to find more about SlowFI and lifestyle design and all the other things that Jessica does, thefioneers.com is the jumping off point. And if you're interested in looking at WPF beyond simply the Facebook group, wovenbywpf.net is a great place to be. And I hope you will join us there.